We welcome you back into another edition of the BrownsZone.com Zone Coverage Podcast. My name is Andy Barch with AM 930 WEOL and 100.3 FM. Joined as always by Scott Petrak, the Browns beat reporter for the Chronicle, Telegram, the Medina Gazette, and of course at BrownsZone.com. Scott, great to be joined by you as always. And with each week that passes in training camp, it just seems like there's a whole new rush of stories for us to talk about.
Yeah, you're right about that, Bull. There's a ton, and, it's not only football. It goes off the field, and I was talking to one of the other writers just a little earlier today, and he said it felt like we went from having nothing to write to way too much to write, and I'm not complaining. I'm just saying we had a real lull, and now it feels like everything in the world's going on in the sports world.
Yes, that's 100% spot on, because you're right. It's all of a sudden a big old avalanche, and some of it good, some of it bad. And let's begin with this. The NBA, of course, did not play last night in wake of the Jacob Blake situation in Kenosha, Wisconsin. Social justice issues certainly coming to the forefront today. There was some talk, we're recording this right around noontime on Thursday, about the Browns discussing whether they should or should not practice today. What are you hearing on that front?
It sounds like they are going to practice, Bull. I mean, like you said, we're just a little bit after noon. We're supposed to start Zoom calls at about 12:30. Practice is scheduled for 2:25. I feel like we would have gotten an announcement by now if the Browns weren't going to practice. Myles Garrett's scheduled to talk to us on Zoom, and he is really socially active. We know he's chief of that Water Boys organization. So I think that having him talk to us, and he talked to us last week, so I think that he will help relay kind of what the players are thinking, why they went ahead with the practice. And I just have to say this, the Browns have been, I'm not going to say the forefront, but they've been really active in this fight for social justice and against police brutality. And Andrew Berry in June started the Be the Solution campaign, where he encouraged people in the organization, media, fans, to do their part to be the solution, whether that's reading up on the problems of the black community, if it's donating money, if it's getting involved in a charitable organization, whatever. He wants people to be the solution, and he encourages everyone to do that. And Kevin Stefanski, when we talked to him in March, he attended a protest. He's encouraging the players to take active roles. Many of the players have, whether it's petitioning Congress with letters or speaking out. So the Browns have been active. So I think if they do decide to practice today, I don't think that's any kind of referendum on that they don't think this is important. I think it's just they decided to practice, and not that obviously football isn't the most important thing, but I do think it's worth noting that the Browns weren't able to have a real practice on Sunday because they had a bunch of false positives with the COVID-19 test. And it was at least 12 players, at least 3 coaches. It was more than that, so we're talking at least 15 people or more than 15 people within the organization. So instead of having a full padded practice, they had a 50-minute light kind of jog through with no team drills. And I don't know if they want to go twice in the same week, not having a real practice, especially when we've talked about it before, Bull. They feel like they're playing catch-up. They have a new coach. They're installing, offensive and defensive systems. And I would think the players would take that into consideration when deciding if they're going to practice. So it could change. And if it does, then, more power to them. And they're not the only NFL team. There's a few others, Washington, Indianapolis. I think I saw Arizona were among the teams that weren't going to practice today. And we saw what happened with the NBA Wednesday night. But that's just kind of where the state of the Browns is from that perspective, whether it's the need to practice and doing all they can to fight social injustice, including my morning started with the Browns, Cavaliers, and Indians announcing they had a joint initiative to fight social injustice. And the first thing on their list is to encourage voting registration. People vote in November. So even if the Browns practice, their minds are still on the greater causes.
Well, let's dive right in. to the Browns practice. Again, at the time of this recording, not sure if they're going to go forward with that or not, but be that as it may, the Browns have had some real issues, especially defensively, so many injuries, and I don't know that anybody could have expected this. I mean, these injuries, Scott, have just been crushing to that defensive unit. How much do you think this is going to force the Browns to be a little bit more active on the free agent market?
Well, that's a great question, Bull, and I don't know just how active Andrew Berry will be. It feels to me like, we see Grant Delpit, right? And he was penciled in to be a starting safety. I don't know if he's penciled, maybe more like penned in to be a starting safety. He was drafted number 44 in April. Now, he's lost for the season with a ruptured Achilles tendon. So the Browns have Carl Joseph and Andrew Sendejo, both veterans that were signed in free agency. Joseph's a starter, former first-round pick. Sendejo has been in the league for 10 years. The Browns wanted him to kind of lead that group and be a third safety, right? Maybe play in some dime situations, help mentor Grant Delpit. I don't think they envisioned him as being an every-down player. It's safety. So they have Sheldrick Redwine. He's a fourth-round pick in 2019, and then a bunch of undrafted guys. So I think you can make the argument that the Browns would be better off signing a free agent, whether that is Logan Ryan, who played for the Titans a year ago, who's available, Tony Jefferson, who the Ravens cut because he's coming off knee surgery. I don't know exactly if he's ready to play yet, although on social media he said he didn't envision himself playing with the Browns because he considers himself a Raven. Maybe they can get that to change, although it didn't sound like that. And then there's Earl Thomas, who the Ravens recently cut after he got in a fight with a teammate at practice. And I get the allure of a guy like Earl Thomas, right? He's been in the Pro Bowl a bunch of times, won a Super Bowl with the Seahawks. But for the Seahawks and the Ravens to give up on this guy within the last 2 years makes me question whether he's the right guy to bring in. And yes, you could say, okay, it's a temporary solution, and I get that. And maybe it's cheap because maybe the Ravens will have to pay the ginormous salary and the Browns can get him for the veteran minimum. And I'm not even dismissing it. I'm thinking Andrew Berry should consider that, but he needs to consider the whole picture. And whether a guy like Earl Thomas is the right guy to bring in right now, new coaching staff, young roster, is he the right guy to bring in? And I think Andrew Berry has to weigh all that, along with, do I just stand pat and hope the collection of guys, when we're looking at Joseph, Sendejo, Redwine, can kind of hold down the fort for a year until Delpit's back, assuming he comes back, right? Achilles is a tough injury. I think that's a tough spot for Andrew Berry to be in. He can also wait until the cut, September 5th, and kind of scour the waiver wire for the best safeties out there. But he's in a tough spot, and I feel the same way about linebacker. We don't know how long Mack Wilson's going to be out. Maybe he only misses 4 or 8 games. Maybe he has season-ending knee surgery. The Browns have kind of gone optimistic with it, hoping he'll be back at some point relatively soon. We don't know that definitively. But what's interesting, Bull, is linebacker and safety were 2 areas that the Browns were weak at heading into the offseason. And they addressed both, but they addressed safety way more. I mean, Delpit, Sendejo, Joseph are all new since March, right? And then they lose one of those guys. Linebacker, they didn't do as much. They signed B.J. Goodson, but he felt like a stopgap. They drafted Jacob Phillips in the 3rd round. You're not sure he's a starter right away. And then you lose Mack Wilson, kind of your best linebacker coming back. So 2 areas that were in huge transition to begin with are again in transition, and I just don't know how Andrew Berry is going to fill those spots.
Well, kind of along those same lines. Last week, Scott, we had talked about how the defense, at least in the early stages of camp, was miles ahead of the offense. Have you seen anything different over the last couple of days that might suggest that that's changing?
Yes and no. Well, I've seen glimpses, and maybe sustained glimpses, of the offense faring better. And, all these practices kind of run together, but I'm going to say Monday's practice, I thought the offense performed better. Tuesday, not so much. I thought Tuesday was another down day for the offense. You just didn't see a lot of plays being made. You saw a couple of Carl Joseph interceptions. That doesn't mean no plays are being made by the offense, but you don't see it sustained. They ran a 2-minute drill at the end of practice, and when they tried to go the length of the field to set up a field goal, first-team offense and second-team offense weren't able to get it done. Baker did throw a 25-yard touchdown to Rashard Higgins when it was a 2-minute drill. They started at the 25. They needed a touchdown, and he hit him on the post, which is a good way to end, but there's just too many plays in periods during practice that were just lulled for the offense. It felt like nothing good was happening, and the defense kind of again dominated. I think the offense is taking baby steps. We talked to the coordinator, Alex Van Pelt. We talked to head coach Kevin Stefanski. And they feel like they're on track with what they need to accomplish, but they recognize and note that there's a huge sense of urgency here. And I think I don't know if we forget, but I'm going to remind everybody, without the off-season, in-person off-season program, and without the preseason, there's a real time crunch here. And I mentioned it with, if they decide to practice today, that's one of the reasons. Because the Browns are still installing the offense. So you're kind of they're working on a dual track of we're installing the offense and we're trying to prepare for the opener, which is only 2 weeks away. And those are kind of tough to mesh. So at some point, all the focus will be on the regular season. But when you don't have the off season, you got this, man, we still got to install, we still got to teach these guys the playbook. And I think it's just made life really difficult on the offense. And at the head of that offense is Baker Mayfield, who, like the rest of the unit, has been up and down with how he's performed during training camp so far.
Well, and certainly one of the keys offensively will be the improvement of the offensive line. On paper, Scott, I think this is certainly the group that looks like it has certainly improved the most. And when you examine what they've got there, I think everybody has a pretty good idea as to what to expect out of Jack Conklin. You plug him in at the right tackle spot and everything is fine. Now, with the rookie on the left side at tackle, it's going to make things at least a little bit interesting. Your thoughts on what you've seen so far from the Browns' first-round pick, Jedrick Wills, at left tackle?
Yeah, again, Bull, this is another area, or actually this is the area that Andrew Berry designated the most important resources to in the offseason. And a lot of that was to protect Baker Mayfield, to give Baker Mayfield a chance to use all the weapons that he's surrounded by. And you mentioned Jedrick Wills, right? The number 10 pick in the draft. They paid Jack Conklin at right tackle $42 million over 3 seasons to be the right tackle. So that kind of shored up the line, right? You had Bitonio at left guard, Treader at center, Wyatt Teller, who's fine at right guard. And then you get 2 new tackles at bookends, and it's okay, the offensive line is going to be a strength. Well, camp starts with J.C. Treader, the center, having knee surgery. And who knows if he'll be back for week 1. That's the hope, but we're cutting it close. Conklin has, the Browns believe that they have the answer at right tackle, and it's Conklin. And not to scare fans, but something physically seems to be bothering him. He had a day of rest last week before an off day. He came back. He's kind of been splitting reps with Chris Hubbard. It really looks like they're watching his pitch count, which, he's been in the league, I think, 4 years, so it's not like he's super old. Like, Joe Thomas, we're used to him not practicing a lot. But they're trying to manage him to get him to the season. And let's assume he gets there and he's fine and he plays at a high level. Then your attention shifts to, Nick Harris, the rookie 5th-rounder at center. But even that's temporary because we assume J.C. Treader will be back, whether it's week 1, week 2, week 3, and be fine. So that's all about Jedrick Wills. And we've talked about this. Well, he was going to be a guy I paid a ton of attention to in training camp because he's making the transition from right tackle his whole life, high school and college, to left tackle. And Andrew Berry, the Browns GM, said, a tackle's a tackle. I don't know if I'm quoting him directly or paraphrasing, but that was a philosophy heading into the draft. We're not going to pay super attention to who played left tackle in college. We're going to evaluate the tackles, and we think that the tackles, whether it was Andrew Thomas or Jedrick Wills or Tristan Wirfs, could make the switch. So they picked Wills, and he's been hurt by not having an off-season program, not having rookie minicamps, not having a preseason, are all affecting Jedrick Wills. And when you watch him at training camp practices, he has struggled. And I think he's struggled more than I would have expected him to. Even though I didn't necessarily buy a tackle is a tackle thing, and I thought it would be a serious question how the transition would go. He's struggled more than I thought. Now, Kevin Stefanski said, hey, in one-on-ones when you're watching, they're working on techniques. If he gets beat, don't read too much into that. I don't know if I'm buying that. But even when I watch team drills, he gives up pressures to Olivier Vernon. The Browns, they have a Building the Browns show, which is kind of the team's behind-the-scenes look. And they had him mic'd up after practices, and he's asking Olivier Vernon to help him because he doesn't feel comfortable yet in that transition. And the fact is, there's not a plan B. Jedrick Wills is going to be the starter week 1 at left tackle. Now, you can help him, right? You can line up a tight end next to him, put a running back behind him to help. And it feels like that's what the Browns would do early in the season to give to help the guy kind of ease into actual NFL reps. But I do think it's maybe concerning is a bit strong, but it's certainly worth noting that he's struggling, and he admits he's struggling. And like I said, we're only 2 weeks from when we're taping this, 2 weeks and 3 days to the opener. And I think that's too short of a window for him to say, yeah, I feel completely comfortable facing the Ravens and Calais Campbell and whoever else they want to rush to try to get to Baker Mayfield. So I think the Browns are going to have to figure out a way to get Wills, to give him help, and to get him where he feels like he needs to be mentally and from a technique standpoint by the time the season starts.
One last thing here before we finish up with the golf shot of the week. Given all that you just mentioned about that offensive line, how much of that do you think has to do with the offense being as far behind the defense as they've been so far in camp?
Part of it. I think it's part of it. I think, and I'll go back to the main theme, is when you don't have an off-season in-person work program, right? So there's no practices. There's no OTAs. There's no mini camps. And you're installing a new system, it's easier to pick up the new defensive system. I just think that's the reality. It's less complicated than everything the offense has to do. And I do think that affects not only Baker Mayfield, it affects every piece, and that includes the O-line. And yes, the O-line is going against a strong defensive line, but that defensive line didn't have Myles Garrett for a while. Now he's back, but it didn't at the start, and the D-line was still seemed to be winning the majority of the battles. But with Wills, it's also a technique thing, right? He's talking about, I did everything my whole life right-handed. Now I'm doing it left-handed. And, this might be a conversation that a year from now is meaningless, right? He's fine. He's ready to have a Pro Bowl season. But when you're staring down the opener, it matters that he spent his whole life at right tackle, and now he's moving to left tackle. And it's hard for me after watching practice and watching the Wills on that video, it's hard for me to say it's not going to have an impact when we get to week 1.
Well, it'll be interesting to see how this all plays out the next couple of weeks here, because you're right. I mean, for the longest time, we were saying there's time, and now all of a sudden the Browns are starting to run out of time for sure. Well, let's hope that you don't run out of time to get out on the golf course this weekend, my friend. I know you had a chance to get out there this past weekend. What shots stood out to you?
Yeah, I actually squeezed. I didn't play that well last Thursday. Did not play particularly well, but I was able to get out yesterday. So Wednesday, my normal Pleasant Valley wasn't going to open until 2 in the afternoon because I got drenched with the storm just as we got to the golf course. So we were able to get out at Shale Creek. I called them. They were able to sneak us out there. So I got in a round at Shale Creek and hit the ball much better, and I'll go with my shot of the week on number 9. It's a short par 4. I tried to hit a 3-wood off the tee just to get in position, and I pulled it, so I was in the rough to the left. And it's downhill to the green. There's a creek that runs in front. The pin's on the front, so there's not a whole lot of room there. And I took a 6-iron, and I said, okay, if it comes out a little soft, it should be enough club. If it's long, that's fine. There's kind of a backstop. Well, it was just the right club because it hit right on the front edge and bounced, took one hop to about, 6-8 feet. So it was a great shot coming out of there. Unfortunately, I missed the birdie putt, which was the story of the day because I don't think I made a putt outside of 2 feet all day. But But it was a really good shot, and it set up a par, and it helped me break 40 on the front nine. So it was a fun shot and at a key moment.
Wow, broke 40 on the front nine. Very well done, man. That's a heck of a shot with a 6 as well, going downhill to the front of the green. Very, very good stuff. Scott, always a pleasure. And you and I will do this again next week. And next week, hard to believe, we'll be right around 10 days away from the season opener.
Yeah, it is. It's really crazy to think about that, Bull. And again, we're going to have a ton to talk about.
Yes, we certainly will. Thank you very much, Scott. Again, that's Scott Petrak, Browns beat reporter with the Chronicle, Telegram, the Medina Gazette, and, of course, at brownzone.com. That's going to wrap up another edition of the brownzone.com Zone Coverage Podcast. For Scott Petrak, this is Andy Barch saying thank you again for tuning in, and we will talk to all of you again next week.